So in terms of our train and build service and kind of setting the stage for our discussion today, just to kind of quickly touch on that. So really, again, our goal overall is to specialize the services we provide for sites in a site-specific way. With train and build, the idea is that, in terms of training and kind of learning best practices, it's great. We love attending conferences and things like that, but you kind of learn a sort of general way to do things or general best practices, but it can be hard for sites to kind of institutionalize that in terms of, these are our policies, these are our practices, or you're doing things and you kind of have questions after the fact of, and who can you talk to, now that you kind of left that conference or what have you. So really the goal is to provide a very specialized way of doing training that is 100% site customized in terms of what we train on, how we train on it, the extent that we train, so that we can not only say, this is how to do CAs, but this is how you do CAs at this specific site, and providing a client playbook. So really kind of making the training and the resources themselves a site customized solution. And with that, and kind of where we're focusing the discussion of this webinar today is with our call and expert service. So again, the goal is to kind of be that ongoing resource for sites to help on an ongoing basis. So even after we do training with sites through train and build, we have a call and expert service, which basically, after the training's done, I don't know that anyone ever feels like they know everything for all services. I mean, internally even, we have collaboration and regular discussions on various items, and it can be just helpful to have an expert online. So first question. So if a study is not qualifying, can I still bill any items? So I would say for this one, short answer is yes, but the longer answer is basically it kind of comes down to site policy. So I would say that some sites tend to take more of a conservative approach with this, and they will say, our site policy is we don't bill for non-qualifying trials, kind of period. Of course, this can prevent some challenges in terms of operational consistency, in terms of sponsor willingness to pay for everything. If you don't have funding for the trial, of course, that's a whole another complication. So I would say more commonly, we'll see that sites still will bill if it's a non-qualifying trial, but the big thing to consider there is, not using the additional coverage of NCD 310.1. So basically, you don't lose coverage just because you're in a trial. You still, have access to kind of your regular coverage that you would get. So that could be, just based on the underlying condition. So you're looking at guidelines, NCDs, LCDs, and kind of patients with this would typically have this. So you're kind of still billing in line with their typical conventional care. If they're already scheduled for something, if there's side effects and their standard of care drugs included in the trial. So just basically kind of keeping in mind that you would still have the ability to bill items. It's just, you're not going to cite NCD 310.1. You're not going to use the modifiers. There's just some things to be aware of with that. Do I have to accept sponsor payment for items? So you definitely don't. I would say most of the institutions we work with will accept payment if it's offered. We do have, or I have worked with a couple sites where they have a policy where they want to analyze everything and not necessarily accept sponsor payment to see if they can bill it to insurance. But of course, so there's kind of some site policy considerations around this. On the one hand, if the sponsor is willing to pay for everything, that's a significant relief in terms of patient burden. And I think, of course, a lot of us can appreciate the positive impact that has in terms of people that often have kind of challenging circumstances in life anyway, in terms of, battling their condition and kind of the financial cost of that overall. But in terms of some sites potentially electing to not have that cost coverage, it can just kind of be a institutional practice in terms of, if they've had issues with billing, like in terms of the sponsor not providing a solid budget or things like that. Like there can be some, of course, sites have to be able to operate well with their budget. So there are some considerations on that side of things. So it's just kind of a, different considerations to it in terms of how you would approach that. The other thing I would say is it doesn't have to be an all or none. Some sites might have a policy specifically for IV administration of the IP because they don't want to try to parse that out because it can get complicated. So it's something that it is an option. I would say it's not something most sites will do, but it is something that you could consider. How do you determine the protocol frequency that is appropriate to bill for a given item or procedure? I'm going to start by saying probably the thing everyone hates most in clinical research. It depends. It's not a super straightforward answer to that. And part of the it depends is related to the type of item that we're talking about. So, physical exam labs, as an example, are they being done when you're getting the investigational product? Does the drug label have a certain frequency that specifies in terms of when you would do certain labs? Does the guidelines have information about, when you would be typically doing those items? Versus, scans as an example, you're more so looking at guidelines, the AUC in terms of oncology, potentially site policy in terms of frequency that's typically done at your institution. So it's one of those things that you can't just say, I don't think you can just say like, oh, this is too frequent. You really have to kind of try to understand the situation and the circumstances. Are they hospitalized? And therefore they're doing labs every day, but they're hospitalized and they have a condition that would warrant that kind of monitoring. So I think that's the key is looking at kind of more of a large picture kind of way and understanding the circumstances and then looking at what else is happening at those visits and trying to like parse it out that way. At times kind of looking at the protocol as well, you can kind of understand in terms of the frequency requirements, like there's kind of a underlying research, rationale as to why they would want it that often. I think the other consideration there too, and sometimes it does kind of come down to site policy or risk tolerance, because as an example, going back to devices and looking at guidelines, it's not often very well spelled out, like in terms of frequency of various items when you would be doing things, or sometimes it will, like especially if it's a procedure that's done outside of research, it'll have kind of a little more detailed information, but this could be a situation too where you might want to lean on clinical team feedback if you're not quite sure if it seems like generally appropriate for the circumstances for the procedure or what have you. It might be worth it to kind of have that conversation with the study team and say, typically for this underlying condition or this type of procedure, sort of what would your outside of trial frequency be with that? And I guess I would say when in doubt, try to be conservative. Don't feel like you have to make it billable just because that's how you got it in the sponsor budget. It's in terms of protecting your site, it behooves you to err towards conservative kind of when in doubt. So what should I know about device studies versus drug studies? This is definitely something where we might do a separate webinar at some point, because I think there's a lot to hit on here. And devices are always a hot topic because it's just a unique thing unto itself. And it's really, you might be an expert in a CA for oncology, but if you haven't done a device study before, it's kind of like relearning everything almost in some ways. Yeah. So I'll try to kind of hit on as many areas that I can think of, and then get Derek to see if he can think of any more. But so starting off with the qualification, Derek was talking about that for IDE studies, we're looking at the FDA letter in terms of, is it an A or B, along with the CMS approval versus, NCD 310.1. But again, that's for the IDE studies, PMAs, 510Ks, different process. Side effects, I would say, is probably one of the biggest ones in terms of our conversation about NCD 310.1 and looking at the drug side effects that we were just talking about. For a device, you're not going to be looking at that in the same way. You're going to be really leaning on those guidelines for the underlying condition and or the procedure. We kind of can't, it's more of a tying it to the routine care of it versus kind of looking at the ICF and citing it that way. Hospitalization, again, we kind of hit on some areas with that. I think I think a key learning in terms of doing a device study is sort of understanding the why they're doing the hospitalization. Going back to the sponsor payment conversation, are they already hospitalized because they have a condition and now they're just doing a procedure? Does the procedure itself specifically require a hospitalization? Would they normally have this type of procedure outside the trial? And then again, with the research hospitalization, trying to budget around the DRGs, there's a lot there. You're using Medicare Benefit Policy Manual Chapter 14 for the device studies. So that's something to just in terms of kind of citations and what you're using for justification. That's a key difference. In terms of kind of going through the items itself in a coverage analysis, one thing that you see, I would say more so with the device studies, is bundled items. So you'll have kind of like the overarching procedure that's happening, and then sometimes, I don't know, I feel like people are kind of surprised to learn the amount of items that can be bundled with the bigger procedure. So you're kind of, should be happening with the coverage analysis in general, but it would happen more so with these complicated device procedures. So there's things to look at with that. Along with that, the coding can get pretty complicated. I think everyone maybe dislikes this part of the device CAs. I don't know most, but it's up there because it can get really hard of, is this comparable to an existing procedure? Is it actually an unlisted procedure? What's all included with that? We are really fortunate that our sister company is a coding company, Elevate Medical Solutions. So people like Derek are absolute experts at coding, but for some of these device ones, we have experts ourselves that we can call in these situations to help us work through that. I kind of touched on this earlier, but like with the guidelines, it can be less specific on timing, frequency, things like that. So it's definitely an area where we work with sites that will have sort of an indication like policy in terms of, like kind of mapping out and making that consistent of when patients are coming in with this underlying condition at our institution, we always do this, this, and this, or these are the standard visits. That can sometimes be really helpful for device studies, is understanding for a specific site sort of what's the follow-up schedule, because it's not going to always align with how often the sponsor is requiring that. In terms of other documents to look at, so reimbursement guide and IFU are pretty key with device trials. It can be really helpful for coding, for kind of understanding what's all involved with that. In terms of the actual billing part of it, there's Medicare Advantage Plus that needs to be kind of factored in with all of that. Okay, so this is more of a broad question, but I am happy to dive into it. How do people learn coverage analysis? And I feel like this is probably something near and dear to Derek and my heart, because we've taught a lot of people. I could say I probably easily have done thousands of CAs. Derek, I don't even know what your number is at this point. It's probably insane. It's a hard skill to learn, and especially if you're coming in, without even clinical research experience, you have to learn. That's a whole kind of thing unto itself. But coverage analysis, in terms of trying to find kind of someone with the skill set to even take that on, it's just, there's so much to it in terms of how you're doing it, and it's kind of, I think Derek, you said it this way too. It's like doing a puzzle. You're trying to put all these pieces together and make it make sense. It's something that actually, in talking to various people from sites, I've had a lot of conversations around this, because I think this is something that has changed in the industry, where sites, more so than, maybe a decade ago when I was kind of first having these conversations, more sites are at least partially doing CAs internally, but there's still kind of that struggle with, one, how do I hire from someone to do this? How do I keep up with the ever-changing research? Because that's kind of the other part of it, is you can get that ground up experience of, basic, here's how you do CAs. And then I think I used this story last time. I very much remember the first CAR T trial I got. I was like, what is this? I don't even know. And it was like a big conversation with 10 of us at the time, trying to figure out like how to even make heads or tails of it. In terms of, and just to kind of set that stage of things, right now we're really fortunate that as a company, we bring in people like Derek, who is beyond an expert. He, knows this through and through, but, I've definitely trained people from the ground up, and it's like 3 months, I would say, easily before they can kind of do CAs. And then they're still requiring extensive QA. And it's just one of those things that it is that hard to do. Like I don't know that there's a magic kind of shortcut around that. But when we were kind of doing the ground up training, I would say it wasn't dissimilar to kind of how we did train and build, kind of because we have that experience and we've done, sort of initial kind of classroom style training, and then kind of working towards more hands-on training and doing QA. And because it is a process, it's something that you can kind of go to all the conferences and attend webinars, and I hope everyone learned something today, but to actually kind of get to that point where you're doing it in a way that you're really making sure that you're doing what is the ultimate purpose of the coverage analysis and kind of protecting your site and avoiding risk and all those kind of things. It is difficult to do. So I mean, really, it kind of ties back to kind of why we're doing all this, and why, for us, that's kind of our mission in general. Like Derek said, ultimately it comes down to the patient, and how we can support that. Not being at a site is supporting sites and sharing knowledge and helping them, do what they need to do to get the treatment to the patients faster. So, if we're one part of that in terms of kind of trying to help share our knowledge, we are, I think, both related to have that ability to do that. So I know that wasn't an easy answer. I wish I could just say, oh, you just do whatever. But I mean, for myself, I very much remember the first couple of months of training, and I almost felt like I was questioning life. Like it's so hard. Like it's just the point of like, and then suddenly you get it, and you start to understand, and then you do a couple CAs or a couple thousand CAs later, and it comes together. But it's a process, and and the other part that I actually enjoy about it is you always are learning. It's never going to be like, I am now an expert in CAs. It keeps you humble.